The Shanghai Cooperation Organization on Monday strongly condemned terrorism in all its forms and manifestations, including the April 22nd Pahalgam attack. The Tianjin Declaration, signed and adopted by all 10 members, called for an end to cross-border movement of terrorists. Member countries, including China and Turkey, expressed deepest sympathy and condolences to the families of the victims and stressed that the perpetrators, organizers and sponsors of such acts must be brought to justice. 26 people were killed on April 22nd after armed terrorists opened fire on tourists in Jammu and Kashmir's Pahalgam. Earlier, addressing the summit, Prime Minister Narendra Modi had called upon member countries to take firm and decisive action to fight terrorism in all its manifestations and forms. However, without naming any country, Prime Minister Modi emphasized that there should be no double standards in dealing with terrorism. Prime Minister also highlighted India's approach to strengthening cooperation under the SCO framework. He noted that India seeks greater action under 3 pillars, which are security, connectivity and opportunity.
SCO को लेकर भारत की सोच और नीति 3 मुख्य स्तंभों पर आधारित है। SCO, S security, C connectivity, O opportunity.
Presidents Xi Jinping and Vladimir Putin took turns to swipe at the West during the gathering. Russian President Vladimir Putin said that the world needed a system that would replace outdated Eurocentric and Euro-Atlantic models and take into account the interests of the widest circle of countries. Putin also sought to defend his Ukraine offensive, blaming the West for triggering the war.
This crisis wasn't triggered by Russia's attack on Ukraine, but was a result of a coup in Ukraine, which was supported and provoked by the West.
And that is a reference to Ukraine's 2013-2014 pro-European revolution, which ousted a pro-Russian president. He also added that the second reason for the crisis is the West's constant attempts to drag Ukraine into NATO. In his speech, Chinese leader Xi Jinping slammed the bullying behavior from certain countries, a veiled reference to the United States of America. Xi told the SCO leaders that the global international situation was becoming more chaotic and intertwined.
Fourth, adhere to fairness and justice, promote the correct view of World War II history and oppose Cold War mentality, camp confrontation and bullying behavior.
Early in his bilateral with Prime Minister Narendra Modi, the Chinese president said that China and India are cooperation partners, not rivals, and that the two countries are each other's development opportunities rather than threats. Prime Minister Modi also agreed that India and China are partners and that consensus far outweighs disagreements between New Delhi and Beijing. He added that India is ready to view and develop the bilateral ties with China from a long-term perspective. And for more on this, our SNL Foreign Affairs Siddhant Sibal is now joining us live from Tianjin. Siddhant, I want to talk to you about the latest bilateral between Russia and India. Some strong words of cooperation coming out of Tianjin, with, of course, the Prime Minister Narendra Modi saying that India and Russia have always stood together in the most difficult situation. Talk to us about this time-tested, long-standing ties between New Delhi and Moscow in the backdrop of US tariffs.
Well, yes, of course, India and Russia relationship are time-tested one and have withstood the test of time. Well, that sums up how the relationship has been since the new or the current world order emerged after the World War II ended. And we have seen several pillars to this relationship, whether it's defense, whether it's trade, whether it is energy. Increasingly, energy has been an important pillar, with India importing energy from Russia. When it comes to trade, while trade has increased, India's main worry has been trade deficit. Defense, of course, has been the historic pillar of the relationship, but both countries are working towards finding more convergences. In fact, Russia, being a veto-holding member of the United Nations Security Council, a permanent member, has always been supportive of India at the UN, including, of course, supporting India's bid to be a permanent member of the United Nations Security Council. Now, today's bilateral meeting was significant in many ways. First, for the first time, a public confirmation from the Indian side that the Russian President Vladimir Putin will be traveling to India in the month of December for the annual summit. In fact, this is his first visit to India since the start of the conflict in Ukraine. The Indian side, of course, during today's bilateral, mentioning about Ukraine, given the fact that just 2 days ago, the Ukrainian president had called the Indian Prime Minister. The Indian side has always said that the only way forward is dialogue and diplomacy. In fact, what we have learned is that the Russian side has briefed the Indian side about the outcomes and the way forward when it comes to the Alaska summit. But all in all, this bilateral meeting will play into how the relationship is going forward. In fact, just last month, August, it was a packed month for India-Russia relationship. The Indian Prime Minister spoke to the Russian President twice. The External Affairs Minister, Dr. S. Jaishankar, was in Moscow. The Indian NSA, Ajit Doval, was in Moscow for talks. And we know that there will be more visits coming from Russia now.
Right, Siddhant. And of course, the Russian president also backed India's role in the Ukraine war. But thank you so much for getting us the latest right there. That's our SNED of Foreign Affairs, Siddhant Sibul, joining us live from Tianjin. All right, to talk more on this, on the SCO declaration, on the bilaterals, we're now being joined by former Indian envoy, Ambassador Dilip Sinha. Ambassador Sinha, welcome to WION. First up, of course, the Tianjin declaration has condemned the Pahalgam terror attack. How big of a diplomatic win is this for India? And while there are strong words coming out of Tianjin, how tough will it be to implement it?
Thank you for having me. It is certainly very satisfying to find that the reference to Pahalgam and the condemnation of terrorism with reference to Pahalgam has found its way in this declaration. Because we must remember that in June this year itself, when the defense ministers had met, then our defense minister Rajnath Singh had to dissociate himself with the declaration because it did not contain a reference to Pahalgam. So China has been very careful this time to ensure that the reference to Pahalgam is there in the declaration. But we must always remember that the reference to terrorism in Pakistan, or what Pakistan calls terrorism, which is Khusdar and the attack on the Jafar Express, have also found reference in this. And the larger implication that you mentioned about terrorism and how effective SCO can be has to take into account the fact that Pakistan, which is the epicenter of terrorism as far as we are concerned, is also a member of the SCO. So while this is a very satisfying development, one should not have any major expectations of SCO in combating terrorism, at least insofar as India is concerned.
I was just coming to that, Ambassador Sinha, that while we do see a rejig or a reset in ties between India and China, will China perhaps change its attitude towards cross-border terrorism?
Well, China itself claims that it is a victim of terrorism. And in fact, the SCO, when it was formed, one of its main purposes 20 years ago was to combat terrorism, separatism, and extremism. And China claims that it is facing these problems in Xinjiang in particular. But in the context of our subcontinent, China's relationship with Pakistan is extremely strong. It is, as Pakistan calls it, an all-weather friend. And we have seen that in the case of Operation Sindoor, the extent to which China is prepared to go to help Pakistan in actual operational situations. So in this kind of situation, given the fact that our concerns of terrorism emanate primarily from Pakistan, we have to be cautious in the extent to which we have any expectations of China in dealing with terrorism as it affects us.
Right, Ambassador Sinha, while India has, of course, taken a firm stance towards terrorism, it has also said that any bilateral ties with China depends on the border issue along the line of actual control. Meanwhile, China has said that don't let the border come in the way of relationship between New Delhi and Beijing. How do you interpret it?
This has been referred to even by the Foreign Secretary in his press briefing. He said that China has been keen that we set aside the border issue and let relations in other areas move forward. But as the Foreign Secretary said, India has made it clear that what happens on the border will affect our bilateral relations. That's understandable because you cannot expect tension on the border and trade to take place at the same time, or at least trust deficit to go away. And without that trust deficit, the relations cannot go beyond a certain point. Trade can continue. Trade doesn't require a huge amount of trust to be there between two countries. Trade is a much easier way of improving relations. But we have to keep in mind that India has always maintained that on the border there has to be peace and tranquility. And that border management is something that China has to understand, that it has to maintain the status quo. Now, they have talked about disengagement in this round of talks that we have had, but there should also be restoration of the status quo ante, that means the status quo that prevailed before 2020. That has not happened. And until that happens, the trust deficit that exists between our two countries, insofar as the border is concerned, will continue. Trade is, of course, a separate issue, and there we have our other concerns as well.
Right. My last question to Ambassador Sinha. Do you think that with terrorism, of course, taking a center stage at the Tianjin Declaration, a proactive and a positive agenda for New Delhi there, how perhaps will this strengthen India's forthcoming BRICS summit in December?
The point that India has made very firmly in this meeting is that terrorism is a central concern for us, and that concern must be addressed. So any organization, whether it's the SCO or BRICS, even in bilateral relations, the point that India faces a problem of terrorism and India wants its friends or whoever claims to be a friend of India support India in this endeavor must be taken seriously. And no country can take India for granted, saying that India must continue to face terrorism and yet improve relations with those countries. So India expects our friends to stand by us when it comes to dealing with terrorism.
Right. Thank you so much, Ambassador Sinha, for joining us here on WION and sharing your insights with us.
Thank you.